The soup was cold the night my son said, "We're done feeding you." Still, I nodded, folded my napkin, and filed his words under expenses unpaid. As his daughter laughed upstairs, I opened the joint account he once called a favor. While the kettle hissed, I traced every transfer he'd labeled as parental support. The same signature I gave him after my stroke became my weapon of choice. That's when I fed the bank with his account and called it closure. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The soup was pale and thin, the kind you make when you're measuring compassion by the ounce. Marla stared at the bowl as steam rose, curling like a question she didn't want to answer. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly, cutting the silence into quarters. From the window, she could see the last of the Idaho sun dying behind the ridge, painting the snowcaps in faint orange light. It was the kind of evening that used to make her feel safe. Now, it only made her aware of how small her chair felt. Drew slid the bowl in front of her with a dull scrape against the table. "There," he said, straightening. "Soup and toast. Easy." His tone was efficient, not cruel, but there was a hollowness in it. The same way a banker might say, "Account closed." Tanya moved around the table, wiping crumbs that didn't exist. "We went over this last week," she said without looking at Marla. "Groceries are expensive, Mom. You've been here 6 months. Time to start pulling your weight." Marla lifted her spoon, steady despite the tremor that liked to visit her right hand when she was tired. The broth tasted faintly of chicken, mostly of salt. She swallowed carefully. "I appreciate everything you've done," she said, voice quiet, polite. Drew leaned back in his chair. "This isn't a retirement plan. You said this was temporary after the stroke." "I did," she replied. He crossed his arms. "Then it's time to start thinking about what's next." Tanya's laugh was quick, thin. "We're covering all your bills. Power, water, groceries. I mean, we love having you, but—" She let the sentence dangle, heavy in the air. Marla placed her spoon down on the saucer with care. The sound of metal on porcelain was sharper than it should have been. "I understand," she said. For a moment, nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked again. Jessa's laughter from upstairs filtered faintly through the ceiling, soft as memory. Marla folded her napkin, one perfect crease. Then another. Her bookkeeping habits had never left her. Numbers calmed her. Patterns made sense. People. Less so. Drew cleared his throat. "It's just that we're trying to keep up with expenses. Tanya's working extra shifts. I've got the mortgage." "It's all right," Marla interrupted gently. "You don't owe me an explanation." Tanya blinked, as if thrown off by the absence of argument. "So, you understand what we're saying?" "I do." Marla smiled. Small, restrained, the way she used to when a client made an arithmetic mistake she'd already noticed. She dabbed her mouth once more, stood up slowly, and carried her bowl to the sink. Her slippers made no sound on the tile. "Where are you going?" Drew asked. "Just going to rest," she said, without turning around. "It's been a long day." He sighed, half in relief. "Okay, Mom. We'll talk more about it tomorrow." But she wouldn't need to. Upstairs, her guest room was neat enough to be mistaken for unoccupied. Her laptop sat centered on the desk, its surface spotless except for a coaster that hadn't been used. She closed the door softly behind her and exhaled for the first time since dinner began. The laptop woke with a glow that painted her face in cold light. The passcode, numbers only she could remember, accepted her touch like an old friend. The familiar spreadsheet opened instantly, lines of data waiting like soldiers for instruction. Drew had once joked that she'd never stop cataloging. He hadn't realized she'd catalog him, too. A folder marked Shared Finances blinked in the corner. She remembered when he'd linked it for her convenience, back when her hands still shook from the hospital IVs. "Just so I can manage things for you, Mom," he'd said. "You don't need to worry about all the numbers." He'd forgotten to unlink it. Marla clicked. The folder opened like a confession. Account statements, tax forms, digital copies of checks. Every line item whispered a story: his mortgage payment, his business expenses, her pension transfer. Each file was labeled neatly, but the balances told a different truth. She leaned closer, heartbeat steady. The years of bookkeeping had trained her to see what others missed. There were deductions marked parent support, transfers marked care expenses, but none had ever reached her account. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Not joy, not vengeance. Something quieter. Arithmetic satisfaction. Downstairs, the faint sound of Drew's laughter echoed through the floorboards, mingled with the clink of Tanya's wineglass. Marla highlighted the folder name and created a copy. She labeled the duplicate, "Cost of Living, Revised." Then she opened a new document. A single cell blinked, waiting for numbers. Marla whispered, "Let's balance the books." And with one keystroke, she began. The morning came pale and brittle, sunlight falling across the spreadsheet still open on Marla's screen. She hadn't slept much. A lifetime of neat ledgers had trained her that balance only came after every line had been verified, every column squared. She'd spent the night tracing Drew's digital footprints through the shared folder, following transactions like breadcrumbs. Now she sat with her coffee cooling beside the keyboard and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in months. Inside were old legal envelopes, bank statements, medical summaries, the thick beige folder labeled POA, Post-Stroke 2023. She slipped the papers free, flattening each page with methodical fingers. There it was. Power of attorney, notarized and initialed in Drew's firm handwriting. The ink had barely faded. His signature ran confidently along the bottom line, hers steady and precise beneath it. The document gave her joint authority over certain financial matters, an arrangement meant to make things easier while she recovered. He'd never rescinded it. She exhaled softly, as if acknowledging a number finally adding up. "Still active," she murmured. A memory flickered, Drew standing by her hospital bed, assuring her, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of everything." The tenderness in that promise had felt real then. Now, in the quiet of her guest room, it sounded like the start of an invoice she was meant to pay. Marla opened another folder on her laptop labeled Tax Help, Drew 2022. When she'd helped him file his returns that spring, he'd given her full temporary access to his business accounts. She'd done it to save him a few $100s in CPA fees. He'd never revoked that access either. Her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. "You should have remembered," she whispered. The phone on her nightstand blinked with the small blue light of a missed notification. She picked it up and scrolled through her contacts until she reached a familiar name: Noah Reed, Boise Credit Union. Noah had been her loan officer years ago, back when she and her late husband refinanced their home. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays and hated arrogance. She dialed. "Noah Reed," came the voice, steady, courteous, with the background hum of a printer and soft office chatter. "Noah, it's Marla Jennings," she said. A pause, then warmth. "Well, good morning, Ms. Jennings. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything all right?" She allowed herself a small smile. "Getting there. I need to update an account and prepare a transfer." "Of course. Which account are we talking about?" Marla read the partial number from the document. There was a soft click as Noah typed. "You know," he said slowly. "You're still listed as secondary on two of his business accounts, both created when you were assisting with his taxes." "I thought so." She leaned back, the chair creaking softly. "Good. Let's use that." Noah hesitated. You want to move funds? Not yet. I just want to confirm the access is still valid and ensure statements come to me electronically as well. He cleared his throat, tone cautious but respectful. All within your rights under this authorization. Then please set that up, she said. Discretion appreciated. You have it, Noah replied. When the call ended, Marla sat for a long moment, listening to the muted tick of the clock and the faint bark of a neighbor's dog outside. Her hands were steady on the desktop. The plan forming in her mind wasn't impulsive, it was arithmetic. Every action equal to a reaction, every figure a correction. A knock came from downstairs. 3 sharp raps, familiar and brisk. Doors open, she called. The door creaked, and Irene Cross appeared, wrapped in a thick cardigan, her white hair tied back like a woman perpetually ready to audit someone. You didn't call me last night, Irene said, stepping in. Which means you're either sick or scheming. Marla gestured toward the chair beside her. I suppose it's the latter. Irene peered at the open laptop screen, eyes narrowing at the spreadsheet. That the boys' accounts? Joint ones, Marla replied evenly. Technically still mine to manage. Irene gave a low whistle. You sure you're ready to stop being polite? Marla looked up, her expression calm but edged with something new, resolve sharpened by disappointment. Politeness was expensive, she said. I've paid it in full. Irene's smile was slow and approving. Then let's make sure the receipts match. Marla reached for her pen and wrote a new heading across the top of her ledger, reimbursement schedule. Outside, a snow flurry drifted across the mountain view, soft and soundless. Inside, the old bookkeeper began a different kind of accounting, one measured not in dollars, but in dignity. And as she clicked Save, a notification appeared at the top of her screen. Joint account access verified. Full permissions restored. Marla's pulse quickened just once, then steadied. She whispered to the quiet room, Let's see how much he remembers. Morning sunlight slid through the blinds in sharp lines, striping the papers spread across Marla's desk. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a Saturday, but that stillness worked in her favor. Drew and Tanya had taken Jessa to her soccer scrimmage. The driveway was empty, their noise carried off somewhere else. Marla adjusted her glasses and opened the laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard a beat longer than necessary. Once, she'd used these hands to reconcile company ledgers, to track missing decimals that could sync quarterly reports. Now, they trembled only when she tried to forget who she was, someone who never left a column unfinished. The joint business account opened with a soft chime. Balance, $14,293.27. Below it, the transaction history scrolled. Auto payments, vendor deposits, a sprinkling of personal purchases Drew thought no one saw. There were even charges from the steakhouse he'd told her they couldn't afford. She clicked Transfer Funds. Her private account appeared in the drop-down menu, her name, her bank, her own address. For years, Drew had framed her financial caution as paranoia. You keep too many backups, he'd said. He hadn't understood that order was the only thing that ever kept her safe. Amount, $6,000. Memo line, reimbursement, cost of care, since March. Her cursor lingered over the confirm button. She breathed in through her nose, steady, controlled. The scent of brewed coffee still hung faintly from the kitchen below. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler hissed against dry grass. Click. The confirmation screen blinked once, then settled. Transaction complete. Referner B144792. Legal. Logged. Irrevocable. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders released an invisible knot. A soft ping announced an incoming message. It was Noah. Quick as always. Transfer registered. Documentation request? Marla typed back. Yes. Label as repayment. Supporting files stored in shared folder. Thank you. Another ping. Got it. You're covered, Marla. She smiled faintly and minimized the window. Her printer came alive beside her, coughing out the confirmation slip. She slipped the page into a labeled envelope, repayment records, and placed it neatly into her filing drawer. Everything she did left a trail. That was the beauty of it. Revenge through documentation. Footsteps echoed outside. Familiar, quick, purposeful. Irene pushed open the door without knocking, a coffee cup in each hand. "You look like a woman who just balanced her soul," Irene said, setting one cup down. Marla lifted an eyebrow. "In a manner of speaking." Irene circled behind her, eyes catching the printer tray. "Is that what I think it is?" "A simple transfer, all within my rights." Irene laughed, a low, smoky sound that belonged in a poker room. "Girl, you just paid yourself back. Twice." Marla didn't deny it. She only glanced at the statement, then back to the window where sunlight hit the snow line. "He used to say numbers don't lie. I suppose that's still true." For a long moment they stood in companionable silence. Irene sipped her coffee, watching Marla as if to memorize this version of her. Measured, deliberate, quietly dangerous. "I'll tell you something," Irene said finally. "They won't even realize what you did. Not right away. It'll take a few statements before the math starts shouting." Marla nodded. "That's the plan." The printer spit out one last page, her updated balance sheet. She clipped it into a binder and slid it beneath the desk. Everything had its place. Everything accounted for. Then, from downstairs, came the distant sound of the front door opening. Voices. Drew's firm, Tanya's high and sharp. Marla froze, listening. "Did you check the alert?" Tanya's voice carried up the staircase edged with irritation. "The account just pinged. Something about a balance change." Marla met Irene's eyes. Neither spoke. Drew's footsteps climbed halfway up before pausing. "Probably a system error," he muttered. But there was doubt in his tone, and Marla heard it. She'd known that sound since he was a boy. The thin tremor of realizing you weren't the one in control anymore. Irene leaned close and whispered, "Guess the math started talking early." Marla smiled, small and unshaken. She closed the laptop with a decisive click, the sound sharp as a seal on a finished ledger. Downstairs, Tanya's voice rose again. "Drew, I swear if your mom—" But Marla was already standing, smoothing her sweater, composure intact. She placed the printed confirmation neatly on the desk, beside a fresh envelope marked, "For my records." Outside, wind rattled the window pane. Inside, every line of her spreadsheet balanced to zero, perfect, precise, irreversible. She turned to Irene and said softly, almost to herself, "Time to start collecting interest." And from below, Drew called her name. The air in the house was dense by mid-afternoon, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marla could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the rhythm of domestic order still running even as everything else shifted. Drew had gone out for an errand. Tanya, though, was still home. Marla could tell by the sound of heavy footsteps and the sharp slam of cupboard doors. In her room, Marla's printer hummed again, spitting out page after page of what looked like ordinary paperwork. Grocery lists, utility statements, transaction summaries, the kinds of documents nobody really read until they had to. But Marla read everything. Each sheet was sorted with the same care she'd once given her clients' accounts. Red ink for unpaid items, yellow highlights for overlapping expenses, blue tabs for charges that had been labeled household. She paused at a grocery bill from May. Under the memo section, Drew had written, "Family groceries. Includes mom's items." She studied the total, cross-referenced her own digital receipts. and drew a careful line through half of it. Family, she murmured, isn't a category you get to claim when you send the invoice to one person. One by one, she stacked the papers until she had 6 neat piles, each representing a month of unacknowledged care. On top of them, she placed a title page, In-Kind Repayment Summary. Irene had said it the day before. They won't even realize what you did. She'd been right. But Marla wasn't hiding. She was documenting. She was teaching them what accounting really meant. She slid the binder into a clear folder and left it on the edge of her desk, right where she knew Tanya would see it. By evening, the kitchen had filled again with the smells of reheated leftovers and resentment. Tanya's voice was already sharp when Marla came down for water. Drew said the account's still weird. Some alert about activity this week. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Marla opened the fridge, the cool air brushing her face. If I did, she said mildly, I'd be sure to document it. Tanya's scoff was loud, disbelieving. You and your paperwork. Marla didn't reply. She poured her glass, took a slow sip, and returned upstairs. Behind her, Tanya muttered something that sounded like old bat. 2 hours later, the sound of drawers opening and closing reached Marla's ears. Then, the inevitable. Tanya's shriek. What the hell is this? Marla looked up from her laptop, calm as a lake at dusk. Tanya stood in the doorway, clutching the binder like it was something diseased. The title sheet, In-Kind Repayment Summary, was visible through the plastic cover. You went through my desk, Marla said quietly. You printed all this. Tanya's voice trembled between rage and panic. This is our money. You stole from us. Marla folded her hands on her lap. No, she said simply. I finally collected. Drew appeared behind Tanya, face tight with confusion. Mom, what is this? What did you do? Just a few reimbursements, she said. For food, utilities, care expenses, all documented, all within legal access. You can review the notes if you'd like. Tanya shoved the binder at him. She's lying. Look at this. She highlighted everything she thinks we owe her. This is insane. Drew flipped through the pages, scanning the columns, the color-coded notations, the careful signatures. The logic was airtight even to him. Still, he set the folder down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mom, he said slowly, you're blowing this out of proportion. This is family business. You don't need to... Marla stood. You said I needed to pull my weight. I did. You said you were done feeding me. I fed myself. I also fed the bank, the utilities, and the grocery store. Through your accounts, apparently. I've only balanced the numbers you left open. Tanya's mouth opened, then closed. Drew stared at his mother as if seeing a stranger. This isn't what we meant, he said. I know, she replied, her voice soft, almost kind. But you should have been more precise. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The printer on her desk clicked again. Another page ejecting automatically, as if the machine itself refused to stop accounting. The noise seemed to rattle Tanya more than anything Marla had said. You can't just... Tanya began, but Marla interrupted, her voice measured. You can call it theft if you want, she said, but you'll have to show the math. She took the binder from Drew's hands, slipped it back into its folder, and placed it neatly on her desk. I don't destroy records. They're protection, not proof. The hallway light flickered, and Drew finally turned away, muttering something about needing to think. Tanya followed him, but not before spitting out, You'll regret this. Marla waited until their footsteps faded, until the front door shut hard enough to shake the picture frames. Then she picked up the newly printed page, her fresh account balance, bold and clear. She slid it on top of the binder where it belonged. Outside, the night settled cold and quiet, snow drifting beneath the streetlight. Inside, Marla reached for her pen and drew one clean line across her ledger. Debts. Outstanding. 0.00. Her lips curved in a small, satisfied smile, and downstairs the front door opened again. Drew's voice low, urgent, carrying up the stairs. "Mom, we need to talk. Right now." The knock on her door came before sunrise. Marla had been awake anyway. Ledger open, pen poised in midair. The house carried the kind of silence that follows arguments. Thick, metallic, like the air before a storm. Drew didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped in, still in yesterday's clothes, jaw set, phone clenched in his hand. "You went too far," he said. "This, whatever this is, it's got to stop." Marla didn't look up. "It stopped last night," she said. "That was the point." "I checked with the bank," he snapped. "They said you still have some kind of access. That's done. I'm removing it today." She turned a page in her ledger. "You can't. Watch me." Finally, she raised her eyes, calm and steady. "You signed a power of attorney after my stroke. It hasn't expired and you didn't revoke it. Legally, I can act on your behalf and close accounts if I find irregularities." Drew blinked. "You wouldn't—" "I already did," she said, her voice as even as the ticking clock behind him. He took a step closer, disbelief written across his face. "Mom, this is crazy. You're going to make a mess you can't undo." "No," she said softly. "I'm cleaning one up." By 8 a.m., Marla was sitting at her desk, the morning light cutting gold stripes across her laptop screen. She dialed Noah's direct line, the same number she'd used for years. He answered on the second ring. "Noah Reed." "It's Marla again," she said, tone brisk. "Quick confirmation. That power of attorney, does it still grant me authority to close or reassign accounts?" He paused, likely pulling up the digital file. "Yes, ma'am, it covers full management rights, including closures and fund reallocation. Is there a problem?" "Not a problem," she said. "A correction." There was a beat of silence, then Noah's low hum. "I'll process it right away. Any specific accounts?" "The joint card first. Redirect all auto payments to my personal account. I'll handle reimbursements." "Understood." "And Noah?" "Yes?" "Make sure every step is logged. Transparency matters." His voice carried a trace of admiration. "Always does." When she hung up, she leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the washed-out winter sky. The world outside was hushed, caught between seasons. She reached for the stack of manila folders she'd labeled in her meticulous handwriting: tax, personal, tax, Drew, elder care expenses. Each file told a version of the same story: money marked as gifts, help that had never been reciprocated. But the IRS didn't call it help when it came from shared accounts. It called it income. Marla pulled a fresh form from her printer tray. Form 709, Gift Tax Return. Her old training as a bookkeeper guided her through the boxes. Where Drew had listed past transfers as gifts, she reclassified them as repayments for personal expenses. Then she attached a new claim: deduction for unreimbursed elder care costs. By the time she was done, her desk looked like a war table of paperwork. Neat, lethal, irrefutable. A tap at her door broke the rhythm. Irene peeked in, holding a folder of her own. "You look like someone halfway through a hostile takeover." Marla smiled thinly. "Just a reorganization." Irene came to stand beside her, scanning the open documents. "You really are filing it all, huh?" "Every cent," Marla said. "He treated my care like a favor. I'm treating it like labor." Irene let out a low chuckle. "That'll sting." Marla signed the final page and exhaled through her nose, satisfied. Pain has a way of clarifying ownership. Downstairs, the slam of the front door shattered the quiet. Drew's voice came first, low and sharp. Then Tanya's. High, panicked. "You're bleeding us dry!" she shouted up the staircase. Marla rose, moving slowly, her cardigan brushing against the frame as she appeared at the top of the stairs. "No," she said, her voice carrying steady authority. "I'm balancing my books." Drew turned toward her, fury and disbelief mingling in his face. "Do you even hear yourself? You're treating this like a transaction." She met his eyes, unflinching. "Everything becomes one eventually." Behind her, Irene appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. "He should have read the fine print," she said softly, almost to herself. Marla descended one step at a time, ledger in hand. "You both said I was a burden, that I owed you. I'm simply repaying what you claimed I cost. Legally, logically, completely." Tanya's voice cracked. "You'll ruin us." "No," Marla said. "You did that when you stopped counting what I gave." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Drew's jaw tightened, his shoulders slumped just slightly, a man realizing the numbers weren't in his favor anymore. "Mom," he said quietly, "this isn't love." Marla's eyes softened. Neither was the soup. She turned, walked back toward her room, and closed the door. The click of the latch sounded final, like the ceiling of a vault. At her desk, a new email notification blinked across the screen. From Noah Reed. Subject: Account closures confirmed. Marla's reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Tired, yes, but intact. She whispered, half to herself, half to the glowing screen, "One less signature between me and freedom." Then she hit print, and the machine began to hum again. Steady, relentless, precise. Outside, snow started to fall, white flecks dissolving against the windowpane. Inside, the printer fed another page into her growing stack of proof, each sheet a quiet declaration of control. And downstairs, Drew's muffled voice rose again, angrier this time, breaking against the walls. Marla didn't flinch. She simply underlined a new entry in her ledger. All accounts reconciled, pending emotional settlement. And beside it, in the margin, she wrote one final note: balance to be collected in silence. The next morning broke sharp and clean. Sunlight catching the frost on Marla's window like shards of glass. The world outside was white and still, but inside her pulse moved with the quiet rhythm of purpose. Her coffee sat untouched. Her pen did not. She'd spent years watching other people's names appear on paperwork, mortgage statements, title deeds, signatures stacked on signatures until hers disappeared under the weight of them. But not this time. Not this piece of paper. Marla opened her laptop, navigated through the familiar banking portals, then to the county recorder's office website. Her old home still bore Drew's name on the deed, the one he'd bought from her after her stroke. The sale had felt like protection back then. He'd promised to keep it in the family, handle everything, make sure she was comfortable. She'd signed the papers from her hospital bed, fogged by medication and gratitude. But gratitude fades faster than ink. Now, line by line, she filled out the digital form for a lien holder claim. Line holder: Marla Jennings. Basis: outstanding debt, unpaid elder care services, unpaid housing contribution, personal asset protection. Her cursor hovered for only a second before she clicked Submit. The confirmation number blinked on screen. Small, unremarkable, but powerful in a way only paper could be. The phone rang almost immediately. She didn't need to look to know who it was. "Noah Reed," came his familiar voice. "I assume you've already seen it?" she said. "You don't waste time," he replied with a low chuckle. Then, more serious, "You realize this will trigger a notification? They'll get an alert once it's filed. And when they see your name listed again on that deed, well, they're going to scream." Marla's voice was calm, precise. They already are, Noah. I'm just changing the acoustics. He let out a long breath. You know, in all my years at this credit union, I've never seen someone audit their own family this thoroughly. That's the problem, isn't it? She said. Families think affection cancels accountability. He was quiet for a moment. You're right. Still, I'll make sure it's logged discreetly. Nothing illegal here, but it's assertive. I prefer accurate, she replied, then ended the call. For a few seconds she sat staring at the glowing screen. The old home's image filled her browser. The wide porch where she used to sit with Jessa on summer evenings. The rose bush Drew had ripped out to make room for a fire pit. He'd said it was too old to keep blooming. She smiled faintly. So was I, right? Her printer began its steady hum again, pulling in fresh paper. One copy of the lien, one of the small claims filings she'd prepared late last night. She'd calculated every hour she'd spent recovering under their roof. Meals cooked, cleaning done, even errands she was too tired to take credit for. 40 hours a month, conservatively. Value, modest, but symbolic. By the time the documents were stamped and saved, she had created a new digital folder, Legal Instruments, Jennings Family Adjustments. The printer stopped. The silence afterward was so deep, she could hear the house creak in the cold. Her cell phone buzzed on the table. Tanya's number flashed across the screen. Marla didn't answer. The buzzing stopped, then resumed, twice more. Finally, it went quiet. Moments later, the voicemail icon appeared. She pressed play. Tanya's voice came through jagged, breathless. You think you can just take everything back? You think paperwork makes you powerful? You'll regret this, Marla. I swear you'll regret it. Marla listened without expression. When it ended, she tapped save, renamed the file, and dragged it into a new folder on her desktop labeled Threats, Audio. For a long moment, she simply stared at the folder's name. It glowed on her screen like a warning light, but she felt no fear, only an odd, cooling peace. Outside, wind gusted against the window, shaking a loose shutter. The house groaned faintly, as if remembering her voice from years before. From the hallway, Irene's voice drifted in, soft but amused. What's that face for? You look like a woman who just put her name back where it belonged. Marla closed her laptop and slid the newly printed deeds into her fireproof safe. I did, she said. It was never gone, just misplaced. Irene smiled, leaning on the doorframe. They'll come storming soon. Marla picked up her coffee at last, took one deliberate sip, and said, Let them try to erase what's been notarized. And as Irene chuckled quietly, another message alert chimed from Marla's phone. This one not from Tanya, not from Drew. It was from the county registrar. Title update recorded. New lien holder, Marla Jennings. Status, active. She stared at it for a moment, then whispered the words aloud, tasting each one like a slow exhale. Active. Finally. Downstairs, a car door slammed. Footsteps approached the house fast, too fast. Irene glanced toward the stairs. Sounds like round two. Marla smiled faintly and set her mug down, her reflection caught in the window beside the frost. Good, she said. I prefer my battles documented. Then the doorbell rang. Long, sharp, insistent. And Marla rose to answer it. The house was still echoing from last night's storm of voices when Marla found it. A folded piece of notebook paper half tucked beneath the corner of her desk. She thought at first it was one of her ledgers, some old balance sheet that had slipped loose. But when she opened it, her chest tightened. Crayon, blue sky, a kitchen table. Her, drawn small but upright, a smile shaped carefully in red. Beside her, a bowl of soup. Across from her, an empty chair. At the bottom, written in neat cursive for a 13-year-old, Grandma's dinner table, where people listen. Marla's throat caught before she could stop it. The paper trembled in her hands. It wasn't art so much as evidence of something still living in this house, something uncorrupted by greed or bitterness. She smoothed the paper flat against her desk, the same way she handled her legal filings, and murmured, "Well, Jessa, at least one of us still sees clearly." A knock came moments later, lighter than usual. Irene's voice floated in. "You alive, Accountant of Justice?" "Barely," Marla said, smiling faintly as she tucked the drawing back into its envelope. "Come in." Irene entered holding a stack of mail. "You've got a registered packet from your attorney, and one angry letter from your daughter-in-law, judging by the handwriting that could dent metal." Marla took the thick white envelope and slid it open with a penknife. Inside lay the latest draft of her estate documents, the ones she'd requested last week. She pulled the pages free, scanning every clause, every beneficiary line. The ink smelled new, final. "Making more edits?" Irene asked. "One," Marla said. "A necessary one." She retrieved the folded drawing from the desk and laid it beside the papers. The contrast struck her, color and innocence against black and white precision. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "how children can see the truth without adding numbers to it?" Irene tilted her head. "You're leaving her something." Marla nodded. "Not everything. Just enough. Education trust, age 25. Activation. I want her to learn before she inherits." Irene smiled. "You're leaving her the truth, not just the money." Marla signed the amendment, the pen moving with slow, deliberate grace. Then she reached the line labeled Primary Beneficiary, drew Jennings, and drew one clean line through his name. For the first time since her stroke, her hand didn't tremble. When she was done, she gathered the pages and slid them into the return envelope, sealing it shut with one firm press of her thumb. Outside, the wind had died. Sunlight was melting the frost off the porch rail. Somewhere downstairs, the front door creaked open, Drew and Tanya returning, voices hushed. The energy in the house shifted, as if it already knew. Irene touched her shoulder. "You sure about this?" Marla gave a small, knowing smile. "I'm sure I'm done pretending love is the same thing as entitlement." 2 days later, Tanya was the one to find the documents. It happened late in the afternoon when the mail carrier dropped off a thick stack of envelopes. Marla was in the sunroom with her tea when she heard the paper rip, the gasp, then the footsteps coming fast down the hall. Tanya burst in, her face flushed. "You rewrote your legacy?" she hissed, shaking the packet like a flag of betrayal. "You took Drew out of your will?" Marla didn't flinch. "I corrected it." Tanya blinked. "Corrected? Are you out of your mind? He's your son." "He was," Marla said softly, when he remembered what that meant. The silence stretched, brittle and hot. Tanya looked at her like she was seeing a ghost, something she thought she'd already buried. "You think she deserves it more?" Tanya asked, her voice trembling. Marla's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, because she never asked for anything." For a heartbeat, Tanya looked ready to strike. Then she caught herself, turned sharply, and stormed out. The front door slammed so hard the window panes rattled. Marla sat for a long moment in the sunroom, feeling the echo roll through the house. Then she stood, crossed to her desk, and unfolded Jess's drawing one more time. The crayon lines hadn't faded. The smile was still bright. She opened her filing drawer and placed the drawing atop the trust paperwork. Then she whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Legacy should feed the right mouths." Her phone buzzed, a new message notification. She checked the screen. From Drew Mom. "We need to talk. About your will." Marla stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then she whispered, "Too late." It's already witnessed. She closed her laptop, drew the blinds, and sat back in her chair as the winter evening descended. Calm, resolved, untouchable. Outside, somewhere down the street, Jessa's laughter drifted faintly through the air, bright as a bell. And Marla smiled. The kind of smile that only comes when the last line in a ledger finally reads, "Paid in full." The snow had melted into dull gray slush by the time the voicemail came through. Marla was folding laundry, soft cotton, her own, when the phone buzzed across the counter. She pressed play without thinking. A man's voice, low and sharp. "You messed with the wrong people." It wasn't Drew's voice, but the message didn't need a name to be understood. The line clicked dead after 5 seconds, leaving the sound of her own breathing in the kitchen. She stood still, her thumb hovering over the screen. There was a time when such words might have rattled her, but bookkeeping had taught her something about threats. Most of them disappeared once you asked for a receipt. She saved the message and labeled it the way she labeled everything. Intimidation attempt, audio 1. Then she picked up the landline and dialed Noah. He answered on the first ring. "Marla, please tell me you're sitting down." "I am," she said, "and I'm fine." "You're more than fine," he said. "You're vindicated. The account freeze that hit Drew's business this morning? It wasn't you. The auditors found mismanaged transfers, multiple violations. It's officially flagged under his ID." A pause. Marla could almost hear him lean back in his chair. "I'm just calling to make sure you know that. Some of his auto payments got redirected during your closure filings, but the freeze is his doing, not yours." Marla smiled faintly, a line of pride hidden beneath her calm tone. "I never said it was mine. I just suspected the universe finally learned double-entry accounting." Noah laughed quietly. "You've got a strange way of celebrating justice." "I'm old," she said. "I like my victories quiet." "Still," he added, "keep your phone close. There's going to be fallout." "I'm used to cleanup," she said, then ended the call. By evening, the fallout had begun. Her inbox lit up with angry texts. "What did you do? They froze the business account." "Fix this now, Mom." She didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she typed a single message at the end of the thread. "It's not a threat if it's just a receipt." Then she put her phone face down on the table. The following afternoon, Irene stopped by unannounced, snow dusting her coat. "You seeing what they're saying about you?" she asked, tossing her gloves onto the counter. Marla arched an eyebrow. "If it's online, I don't look. If it's on paper, I archive." "It's neither," Irene said, pulling out her phone. "It's Tanya. She's been talking to the neighbors. Says you're losing it. Dementia, memory issues, confusion. She's building herself a story." Marla's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "That's a poor choice of narrative. I've got receipts." Irene smirked. "That's what I told the wellness team." Marla blinked. "You called for one?" "Better me than them," Irene said. "They'll be here in an hour. You'll pass it blindfolded." Marla sighed but nodded. "All right. Let's make sure they see order when they walk in." By the time the social worker arrived, young, polite, clipboard in hand, Marla's home looked like a museum of precision. Papers filed, meals prepped, medications logged with timestamps. She offered tea, answered every question with calm accuracy. When it was over, the woman smiled. "You seem perfectly capable, Ms. Jennings. Honestly, I wish half our cases were this organized." Marla smiled back. "I find chaos unprofitable." After the door closed, Irene grinned. "You aced it." Marla returned to her desk and opened a new file. Medical directives, revision. She clicked through the old document, the one where Drew's name sat beside primary decision maker. Her finger hesitated over it for a moment, not from sentiment, but memory. of hospital lights and promises that had curdled into control. She deleted his name. Under new designy, she typed Irene Cross. She printed the form, signed it, and slid it into her safe. "If they're going to tell people I'm losing my mind," she said quietly, "I might as well make sure it's mine to lose." That night, the phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. She pressed play. This time, it was Drew's voice. Not angry, just hollow. "Mom, they're saying you did this on purpose, that you're trying to ruin us. You wouldn't, right?" She let the message finish, then deleted it without listening twice. Outside, wind lifted the edges of the blinds. Snow began to fall again, faint and relentless, coating everything in clean, unmarked white. Marla turned back to her desk, wrote a final note in her ledger, and underlined it once. Power of attorney, intact. Cognitive capacity, verified. She smiled to herself, the corner of her mouth curling upward in quiet satisfaction. Some debts, she thought, weren't measured in dollars. They were measured in clarity. And now, she had both. The letter from the county hospital arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a utility bill and a glossy flyer for senior yoga. The envelope was thick, the kind that carried decisions. Marla slid it open with the same careful precision she gave to every number she'd ever entered in a ledger. Inside were 3 pages of medical evaluations, clean margins, official stamps, signatures from 2 separate physicians. She skimmed the first paragraph, her lips parting just slightly. Cognitive capacity, fully intact. Decision-making ability, sound. Recommendation, retains full autonomy. Marla set the papers down and let the quiet fill the room. She'd expected it, of course, but confirmation still carried its own kind of music. For weeks, Tanya had whispered to anyone who would listen that Marla was slipping, that maybe it was time to have her legally reassessed. And now, with this letter, the story collapsed under its own weight. The phone rang. Noah's voice came through, calm and certain. "You should check your email. I sent the legal confirmation. The POA's been reviewed and formally upheld. Permanently valid." Marla exhaled slowly, smiling. "That must be a phrase you don't get to say often." "Not when families fight this hard," he said. "But your documentation was airtight. They can't touch it. They can't even request a review without your consent now." "Good," she murmured. "I was worried my peace of mind might still be pending approval." He chuckled. "Marla, you're a force. If I ever need representation, remind me not to get on your bad side." "Don't give me reasons to," she said gently, then ended the call. Irene arrived an hour later with her portable notary stamp and a grocery bag full of blueberry muffins. She'd insisted on both, business and breakfast. "Figured you might want to make this official," Irina said, setting the stamp on the table with ceremonial weight. Marla raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The part where you let go of what doesn't belong to you anymore," Irene replied, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Across the top, she'd typed in bold letters, "Release of emotional burden." Marla laughed softly. "You made this up?" "Damn right I did. Symbolic only. No IRS filing required." Still, Marla picked up the pen. Her handwriting was as deliberate as ever. Even now, with her heart pounding in a way she hadn't expected. When she finished signing, Irene added her notary stamp at the bottom, pressing firmly until the raised seal shimmered in the light. "There," she said, satisfied. "Now it's not just therapy. It's documentation." Marla looked at the embossed seal and whispered, "Everything feels lighter when it's been notarized." Later that afternoon, she sat by the window with her laptop and composed a new letter. No dramatics, no explanations, just clarity. She attached copies of her updated estate plan, her trust documents, her medical directive. Every line accounted for, every clause beyond contestation. The email subject read, "For your records, Drew." At the end of the message, she wrote one final sentence. Interpretation invites confusion. This leaves none. Then she clicked send. 2 days passed before they showed up. It was Tanya first, tearful and trembling in the entryway, waving a printed copy of the email like it was evidence of betrayal. "You mailed us your will?" she said, voice cracking. "Who does that?" Marla didn't move from her chair. Someone tired of being misquoted. "You turned your back on your own son," Tanya cried, her words trembling with outrage and disbelief. "You've cut him out of everything. Your home, your accounts, your legacy." Marla closed the leather ledger in her lap, the sound precise, final. "He turned his back first," she said evenly. "I just kept walking." Tanya's face twisted somewhere between anger and heartbreak. "You'll die alone," she whispered. Marla met her gaze, unflinching. Alone isn't the same as unloved, and unloved is what you chose. Before Tanya could speak again, the front door opened. Drew stepped inside, expression unreadable. His eyes flicked from his wife's tear-streaked face to his mother's calm composure. The silence that followed was sharp enough to hurt. He held the printed pages from the email in his hand. "You really did it," he said quietly. "Every document, every change. You even had it notarized." Marla inclined her head slightly. "If it's not in writing, it's not real." Drew's throat worked, as if the words he wanted to say had no place to land. Finally, he dropped the papers onto the table. They scattered across the polished wood, black ink against pale grain. "I can't believe you'd do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marla stood, meeting his eyes. "That's because you still think this is about belief. It's about proof." The words landed between them like a closing door. Tanya's hand gripped Drew's arm, pulling him toward the exit. "Let's go. She's made her choice." Marla watched them leave through the window, their silhouettes dissolving into the soft snow. She waited until their car disappeared down the hill before turning back to the table. The signed release of emotional burden lay beside her ledger, Irene's embossed seal catching the last of the daylight. Marla smiled faintly, whispering to the empty room, "Freedom looks good in triplicate." Then her phone buzzed, a new voicemail alert. No name, just an Idaho area code she didn't recognize. She pressed play. A man's voice spoke, quiet but deliberate. "Mrs. Jennings, this is regarding your lien filing. Someone's attempting to contest ownership." Marla's pulse quickened, not in fear, but anticipation. She reached for her pen and opened a fresh page in her ledger. New entry, contestation, pending response. And below it, in crisp blue ink, she wrote, "Response. Immediate." The grocery store was nearly empty, the way Marla liked it. Quiet aisles, humming freezers, a cashier who didn't make small talk. She pushed her cart slowly, scanning prices like a jeweler checking for counterfeits. Every dollar had to mean something now. Every item, an assertion of independence. She paused in front of the soup aisle. Chicken noodle, cream of mushroom, tomato basil. She picked the last one, holding it a moment longer than necessary before setting it gently in her cart. "For symmetry," she murmured. Her cart filled modestly, rice, eggs, butter, apples, tea. No extravagance, no indulgence. Still, she smiled when she placed a single chocolate bar near the checkout belt. A quiet rebellion. The cashier, a boy young enough to still believe kindness was his idea, smiled. "Stocking up, Ms. Jennings?" "Restocking," she said. "Different thing entirely." When the register beeped the final total, Marla handed over her card, and watched as the receipt printed out in a slow, unbroken line. She folded it neatly, slid it into a small accordion file she kept in her purse. Groceries, independent purchases, a new category, newly earned. Outside, snow flurries swirled around her coat. The world smelled like thawing earth and cold metal. For the first time in months, she felt weightless. That afternoon, Irene sat at Marla's kitchen table surrounded by papers and IRS printouts. "You realize you qualify for the dependent caregiver credit?" she said, tapping a highlighted paragraph. "Since you covered your own expenses during recovery and provided mutual care, it applies. It's poetic and taxable." Marla smirked. "I always said caregiving was work. Now it's billable." Together, they filed the claim online, Irene reading aloud each line while Marla entered the figures. The two of them made a strange kind of music, key clicks and laughter, the rhythm of women who'd learned to weaponize bureaucracy. When they finished, Marla poured tea for both of them and looked at her now tidy counter. "I think I'm finally out of their orbit," she said. Irene raised her cup in mock salute. "To freedom by documentation." Marla clinked her cup gently against Irene's, "and meals you don't have to justify." Later that evening, Marla unpacked her last purchase, a brand new crockpot, sleek stainless steel. The old one had been banished years ago, dismissed by Tanya as too slow. Marla set this one proudly on her counter, ran her hand along the lid, and smiled. When the stew began to simmer, the scent filled the kitchen. Onions, garlic, bay leaf, something warm enough to make even the cold walls feel alive. She was stirring when she heard the soft knock at the door. She didn't need to look. "Come in, Jessa." The door creaked, and her granddaughter's small face peeked through. "Dad's working late," Jessa said quickly, voice low. "Mom's at the store. I had an art project, but I finished early." Marla nodded, pretending not to notice the snow still clinging to the girl's shoes. "Hungry?" Jessa's grin bloomed like sunlight through clouds. "Always." They ate at the small kitchen table. Real food, not the strained politeness of family dinners. Jessa talked about school, her friends, her drawings. Marla listened, really listened, until the girl fell quiet halfway through her second helping. "Grandma?" "Yes, honey." "Why does Dad get so mad when I come here?" Marla set down her spoon. "Because sometimes people mistake control for love. But that's not your fault." Jessa frowned. "Mom says you make things harder for him." Marla smiled gently. "Maybe I do, but only because I stopped making them easier." The girl looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Can I stay for dinner again tomorrow?" Marla reached across the table and brushed a crumb from Jessa's chin. "You're always welcome at a table where no one keeps score." It should have stayed their secret, but secrets in this family had a short shelf life. 3 days later, Tanya appeared in the doorway. No warning, no knock. Her eyes swept the kitchen, catching the second-place setting still on the counter. "She was here," Tanya said flatly. "You fed her." Marla didn't answer. Tanya's voice rose, cracking. "You don't respect boundaries. You're poisoning her against us." Marla's tone remained level. "I fed her dinner, not resentment. There's a difference." "You're done seeing her," Tanya snapped. "I mean it. You so much as text her. I'll block your number. I'll make sure her school knows." Marla folded the dish towel in her hands. "Be careful, Tanya. Paper trails run both ways." But Tanya was already storming out, coat half-zipped, rage filling the hall. When the door slammed, Marla stood in the stillness it left behind. The air still smelled of stew. The empty bowl beside her felt heavier than it should have. She wiped the counter, turned off the light, and whispered to no one. "They can ban visits, but they can't erase memory." Then she opened her ledger, inked a new line at the bottom of the page, and wrote, "Emotional credit, deferred until adulthood." Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering snow like torn receipts across the street. The cottage sat on the far edge of town, tucked between a row of ponderosa pines and a creek that never quite froze. The siding was soft yellow, the kind of color that looked like it remembered sunlight even in winter. Marla stood in the gravel drive with her keys in hand, watching the movers carry the last of her boxes through the open door. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and new paint. The floors gleamed. The walls were bare, but waiting. A single ray of afternoon light reached through the window and fell across the kitchen counter, the exact spot where she set down her new crock-pot. It looked right at home, humming already with quiet authority. Irene arrived half an hour later, her old Subaru packed with odds and ends that hadn't fit in the truck, boxes labeled kitchen tools and documents. Keep close. She walked in without knocking, like always. Smells like freedom and all-purpose cleaner, she said, setting down a box. You actually did it. Marla smiled, her shoulders relaxing in a way they hadn't for months. I told you I would. Once you learn how to keep receipts, you learn how to move cleanly. They worked side by side, arranging small pieces of order. Books on the shelf, photos in frames, a vase of supermarket tulips on the table, Irene's gift. When the last box was emptied, Irene stood in the middle of the room, hands on hips. You sure you want to be out here alone? Marla looked around the quiet space, the pale curtains shifting in the light breeze. Alone isn't what this is, she said. It's unmonitored. Irene laughed. There's a bumper sticker in that. Marla handed her a glass of iced tea. You can print it when I'm dead. Until then, I prefer subtlety. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, everything felt suspended. The kind of stillness that comes after a long, loud storm finally gives up. When Irene left, twilight had begun to slide over the pines. Marla sat at her small writing desk, unpacked her laptop, and connected to the cottage's new Wi-Fi. The glow from the screen warmed the otherwise quiet room. Her phone vibrated once on the desk. A text. Drew, you left? She stared at it for a long minute, her reflection in the glass steady, expressionless. Then she typed back. You said you were done feeding me. I fed myself. And the bank. She hit send, powered off the phone, and didn't look again. The next task was paperwork. Always paperwork. Marla opened her folder labeled POA Amendments, Final, and filled in the last revision. Drew's name was already crossed out from prior drafts. This one made it official. Under Authorized Representative, she printed a single word in her careful script. None. It felt like the cleanest line she'd ever drawn. The printer hummed once, the machine's steady rhythm blending with the soft tick of the clock. She signed at the bottom, slid the pages into her safe, and closed it with a decisive turn of the key. For the first time in years, there were no outstanding forms, no pending approvals. Every column was reconciled, every line item balanced. Before bed, she opened a fresh envelope and pulled out the stationery she'd saved for this purpose. Heavy, ivory paper that felt important even before words touched it. At the top, she wrote, For Jessa, to be opened on your 18th birthday. Her pen moved slowly but without hesitation. Dear Jessa, by the time you read this, you'll know that truth doesn't always make people comfortable, but it keeps you clean. You'll inherit less than some expect, but more than enough to stand tall. Remember, generosity without boundaries becomes debt. Protect your balance. Always. She paused, the pen hovering, then added one final line. The world will tell you to forgive and forget. I suggest you remember and move smart. She folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in her fireproof box beside the deed to her cottage. Outside, the night pressed close. Silent, heavy, kind. The creek murmured somewhere beyond the trees. Marla walked through each room one last time, flicking off lights, touching the backs of chairs, aligning a frame here and there. The air still smelled faintly of stew from her first meal in the new kitchen. She poured herself a small glass of sherry, sat by the window, and watched the snow begin again. Her phone buzzed once more. Another text. Probably from Drew, maybe Tanya. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she whispered to the dark glass, her own reflection staring back. Addresses change, habits end, but records, those last forever. Then she lifted her glass in a silent toast. To peace, to privacy, to properly labeled folders, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Outside, the cottage lights glowed warm against the snow, the only bright thing on the long, quiet road she had finally chosen for herself. The morning sun reached through the kitchen blinds in quiet stripes, landing on Marla's breakfast table. A single mug of tea, a slice of toast, and her open laptop. The cottage was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rhythmic tapping of her keys. On the screen glowed a half-finished document titled Obituary Draft. She'd started it the way she'd start any other record. Factual, restrained, all the right dates in all the right places. Then she reached the section that asked for survivors. Her fingers paused. The cursor blinked on a blank line. Finally, she typed, "Survived by quiet, survived by peace." She sat back in her chair, reading the words until they felt complete. The phrasing was unorthodox, but so was the life it marked. From the desk drawer, she pulled out a folder labeled Legacy Trust, Update. Inside, every name had already been accounted for, every clause drafted. Only one edit remained. With a firm stroke of her pen, she drew a single line through Drew Jennings, and below it, wrote, Jessa Marie Jennings, sole beneficiary. The ink bled slightly through the page, dark and permanent. By late morning, Irene showed up with her usual announcement, 3 hard knocks and a cheerful, incoming paperwork. She set a paper bag of scones on the counter and squinted at the document open on Marla's screen. Obituary? She asked. You're a bit early for that, aren't you? Marla smirked. Bookkeepers don't wait for end-of-year reports. We prepare them. Irene leaned over the back of her chair. Let me guess, everything's balanced except the emotional column. That one doesn't balance, Marla said. Irene studied her a moment longer, then softened. You've deleted every debt except emotional ones. That's the last part, isn't it? Marla didn't look away from the screen. Not deleting, she said quietly. Just filing it under unpaid. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft scrape of Irene's chair as she sat down across from her, tearing a scone in half. You're the only person I know who can turn forgiveness into a ledger entry, she said, smiling gently. Marla allowed herself a small laugh. At least this way, it stays accounted for. That afternoon, snow drifted lazily outside as Marla opened a blank notebook, the first she'd bought in years without any intent to record expenses. The cover was forest green, soft to the touch. She dated the first page neatly in the corner, January 3rd. Then she wrote, Freedom isn't loud. Her handwriting was smaller than she remembered, tighter. She added another line. It's the sound of not asking permission to exist. The words felt heavier than ink. They felt earned. When she closed the journal, she left it beside the vase of tulips Irene had brought weeks ago. The petals had wilted, but not enough to be discarded. Some things deserved to fade naturally. By dusk, the sky outside had turned the color of old pewter. Marla poured herself tea and reached for the phone. Noah answered before the second ring. Mrs. Jennings, he said warmly, how's cottage life treating you? Quietly, she said. And that's the highest praise I can give. I like the sound of that. There's one last thing I need, she continued. I want all remaining Jennings accounts, business, personal, or otherwise, marked restricted. No access allowed. Not for inquiries, not for audits, not even through me. Close every corridor. Noah hesitated. You're sure? That means not even you can. That's the point, she interrupted gently. Peace requires boundaries. He exhaled, his tone half admiration, half warning. You're one for clean breaks, aren't you? Marla smiled faintly. No, Mr. Reed, I'm one for clean math. She thanked him, ended the call, and placed the receiver back in its cradle. Outside, a few early stars pricked through the fading light. Inside, the cottage was still, not empty, but whole. She gathered her documents, sealed them in an envelope, and slipped them into the top drawer of her desk. On the front, she wrote, "For Jessa, inheritance of peace." For a long time, she just sat there, listening to the small, reassuring hum of her home. The fridge cycling, the baseboard heater whispering, the wind brushing against the glass. Her phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of her. Unknown. You think shutting doors keeps you safe? We still share your name. Marla read it twice, then deleted it. In her ledger, she turned to the final page and wrote one more note in blue ink. Shared name, terminated. Legal identity, self-owned. She closed the book, her reflection steady in the window. Then, with the faintest smile, she whispered to the quiet room, "And that's the last balance I'll ever have to settle." Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping down from the pines. Not a storm this time, just a gentle erasure, as if the world itself was finally filing her story under resolved. The morning began like any other. A slow light filtering through the pine branches, the faint groan of the heater kicking on. But inside Marla's cottage, something shifted. The air felt charged, deliberate, like a ledger's final page waiting for its closing signature. She brewed her tea, measured the honey precisely, and carried it to her desk. The laptop flickered awake, casting a bluish glow over the scattered folders. On the screen, her spreadsheet opened automatically. Her digital confessional, years in the making. The header read, "Final Estate Statement, M. Jennings." Each tab was meticulous. Assets, liabilities, liens, transfers, taxes. There wasn't a number without an explanation, not a date without documentation. Every penny told a story, and for once, it was hers. At the bottom of the final page, she added one last line, bolded, "All accounts settled, no balances remaining." She saved it twice, once to her drive, once to an encrypted backup, then exhaled. "Done," she whispered. Finally. Her printer came alive with its familiar hum, the paper feeding through one sheet at a time. The soft mechanical rhythm filled the cottage like the heartbeat of something being completed. When it stopped, Marla gathered the warm pages, clipped them neatly, and slid them into a manila envelope labeled "Legal Packet" for delivery. She wrote two names on the front in her tidy handwriting, Irene Cross and Noah Reed. They were the only people she trusted to keep what she was about to leave behind. By mid-morning, Irene was at the door, bundled in a wool coat, cheeks pink from the cold. She didn't knock. She rarely did anymore. "You said to bring the notary stamp," she said, holding it up like a badge of honor. Marla smiled, motioning to the table. "And I said to bring coffee." Irene produced 2 cups from a cardboard tray. "I multitask." They sat across from each other as Marla explained what was in the packet. Her estate summary, her trust verification, her final codicil. "Everything's challenge-proof," Marla said. "Irrevocable. Signed. Witnessed. Cross-referenced. They can huff and bluster, but it won't matter." Irene turned the packet in her hands, studying the neat handwriting. "You're really doing it. Cutting every tie." Marla's gaze softened. "Not every tie. The ones that strangled. Yes. the one that tethered me to truth, that stays. She reached for another envelope on her desk, smaller, sealed with a faint wax stamp. Across the front she'd written in blue ink, for Jessa. "I want this delivered with everything else," she said. "When the time comes." Irene ran a finger over the envelope. "What's in it?" "A letter," Marla said. "It says what I couldn't when she was 13. She paused, looking past Irene toward the window where snow drifted against the glass. "I gave her more than meals," she said quietly. "I gave her the truth." Irene's eyes glistened. But she didn't interrupt. She just reached across the table, squeezed Marla's hand once, then got to work stamping the packet, the seal pressing firm and final. That afternoon, Marla made her last call to Noah. "Noah Reed," he answered, the sound of papers shuffling behind him. "It's Marla," she said. "I'm sending a packet by courier. It contains my final estate statement and updated codicil. Please file it under restricted status. Permanent." "Of course," he said. "I'll store it with the trust documents. You're really finalizing everything, huh?" "Yes," she said. "Some ledgers don't need to stay open forever." "I'll handle it personally," he promised. Then, with a note of warmth, "You've done good work, Marla, clean work." She smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted on my record." When the call ended, she turned back to the computer. Only one task remained, her joint accounts. The one still carrying Drew's name in some corner of the system. She opened each one, checked the balances, transferred residual cents into her personal account, and clicked Close Account. Each confirmation ping felt like a breath released, a chain unfastened. By the time she finished, the list on her screen was short and beautiful. Active accounts. 1. Private. She opened a new document and titled it Final Statement, Non-Financial. Underneath, she typed a single line. "Forgiveness is not required for balance. Truth is enough." She printed it, signed her name at the bottom, and slipped it into the safe with everything else. Then she powered down the laptop. The screen dimmed, blinked once, and went black. The sudden quiet filled the room. Marla sat for a long time, hands resting on the cool surface of the desk. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt exact. The kind of silence that follows the last note of a song played perfectly in tune. From outside came the crunch of tires on snow. The courier arriving to collect the packet. Marla stood, carried the envelope to the door, and handed it over without ceremony. When she closed the door behind her, the house seemed to exhale. She poured herself a small glass of water, took a sip, and looked toward the window where the late light slanted through the pines. Her reflection appeared faint but steady. The portrait of a woman who had finally, meticulously, finished everything. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke to the empty room. "I'm in the clear now." And with that, she turned off the desk lamp, the soft click echoing like punctuation at the end of a long, exacting sentence. The cottage fell still, bathed in the dim gold of completion. Outside, the courier's car disappeared down the road, carrying the last statement they would never be able to erase. The snow had stopped by evening, leaving the world clean and soundless. Inside the cottage, the lights glowed soft and golden, their warmth pooling against the quiet. Marla moved through the small kitchen without hurry, slicing onions, measuring broth, humming under her breath. The stew simmered on the stove, its aroma curling through the air. Thyme, pepper, and something faintly sweet from the carrots she'd diced too small on purpose. The new crock-pot burbled contentedly in the corner, the same steady rhythm as her heartbeat. She set the table for one. A proper place setting. Linen napkin, real silver, the chipped bowl she refused to throw away. It had a hairline crack across the rim, the same one Drew used to complain about. Now, she thought, it held perfectly. The first bite was rich, full, and hot. She closed her eyes, let it settle on her tongue, and smiled. This was dinner. Not survival, not gratitude in exchange for tolerance. Just food, warm and hers. Outside, the wind brushed the pine branches. Inside, there was only the sound of her spoon against porcelain and the slow creak of the house settling into evening. When the dishes were done, she pulled open the desk drawer where her documents rested. At the top of the stack, folded neatly beside her will, was a small cream envelope addressed in looping, youthful handwriting. "Thank you, Grandma." Marla opened it carefully, as if the ink might flake away after too much handling. Inside, the card was simple. A hand-drawn sunflower, uneven petals radiating toward the edges. Inside, Jessa had written, "Thank you for showing me what strong looks like when it's quiet." Beneath the words, a small heart drawn in orange crayon. Marla ran her thumb across it, smiling so faintly it barely reached her lips. She placed the card beside her ledger, keeping it open this time. It deserved air. An hour later, headlights swept briefly across her window. Moments after, the front door opened with a familiar creak. Irene's voice carried down the hallway, bright as ever. "You didn't think I was letting you spend your first night of freedom without dessert, did you?" Marla turned, amused. "You bribe me with carbohydrates again?" "Lemon cake," Irene said, holding it high like a trophy. "Still warm. You'll forgive the intrusion once you taste it." They sat together at the little kitchen table, forks clinking against porcelain. The citrus smell mingled with the fading scent of stew. It felt domestic in a way neither of them had experienced in years. Irene watched her for a moment, her smile soft. "You know, for all the storms you walked through, you make peace look easy." Marla chuckled. "Funny how silence feels more than anger ever did." "Because silence listens back," Irene said. They laughed then. Real laughter, deep and unguarded. It spilled through the cottage, bright and full, the kind of laughter that hurts in the best way. When it finally ebbed, Marla wiped a tear from her cheek, shaking her head. "You're going to make me regret not getting a second slice." "You'll regret nothing," Irene said. "That's kind of your thing." Later, after Irene left, the house returned to its hush. The plates were washed, the leftover cake wrapped in foil, the kettle ready for morning. Marla sat at her desk one last time, her pen poised above the open page of her ledger. The lamplight cast her shadow long across the surface, her silhouette steady, unshaken. She wrote slowly, carefully, as she always did. Final update filed, all debts closed, all ties untied. She let the ink dry before adding the last line, her handwriting smaller now, like a whisper committed to paper. Ledger summary. Balance. In full. Marla closed the book and rested her palm on its cover. The paper was warm beneath her hand, as if holding its own heartbeat. She looked toward the window, where the world outside had turned to silver under the moonlight. The pines stood tall and still. The creek murmured somewhere unseen. Her reflection in the glass looked softer tonight. Less a survivor, more a woman simply living. She whispered, "That's enough." And somewhere beyond the frost-edged glass, a lone owl called once into the night, a sound so pure it felt like punctuation. Marla smiled, reached for the lamp switch, and turned the light off. Darkness filled the room, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't empty. It was earned. Spring came quietly to the edge of Boise, soft and reluctant, as if asking permission. The snow receded in slow ribbons along the fence line, revealing the pale shoots of early crocuses pushing through the soil. Marla knelt in her small garden, wearing old gloves that still bore the faint scent of lemon soap. The air was cool but mercifully still. This was her rhythm now. Mornings with her plants, afternoons with her tea, evenings with silence. She didn't miss the noise. She didn't miss anything. A car door closed in the distance. Tires crunched on gravel. Through the pine shadows, she could make out the shape of a familiar sedan turning into her drive. Drew. He sat there for a while, engine idling, maybe building up courage, maybe deciding whether the math of apology was worth the cost. Marla didn't move. She stayed in the dirt, trimming a dead stem, the pruning shears clicking like punctuation marks. When the car door finally opened, she stood, brushed off her knees, and went inside before he could reach the porch. By the time he knocked, once, then again, she was already pouring herself a glass of water. The sound of his knuckles on her door echoed through the quiet house like an old ringtone she'd already muted. "Mom," he called. "Please, I just want to talk." She watched his blurred outline through the frosted window of the door. He looked older, or maybe she just looked clearly for the first time. Marla didn't open it. Instead, she said through the wood, her voice even. "There's nothing left to explain, Drew. Everything's documented." Silence. Then his voice, small. "You're still my mother." Marla set her glass down. "And you're still alive to fix what you broke. That's more mercy than you gave me." The quiet after that was vast. Not angry, just absolute. Eventually, the car door slammed again, and the sound faded down the hill. Marla turned off the porch light. She didn't watch him go. 2 days later, the mail arrived. A neat white envelope from her credit union, the familiar watermark glinting faintly in the sunlight. She slid it open with her thumbnail, expecting nothing more than a routine statement. But when she unfolded it, her breath caught. For the first time in years, every column was clean. No cosigners, no shared access, no residual balances or pending reconciliations. Just her name, alone, written once at the top and once again at the bottom beside the line marked Authorized Owner. She smiled, not broadly, but deep enough that it reached her eyes. The numbers didn't matter anymore. It was the absence of interference that felt like wealth. That afternoon, she updated Jess's trust file. She added one line to the label, "To be opened after graduation." Then, in her notebook, she wrote a private note beneath it. "So she'll inherit wisdom before money, the only balance worth keeping." The ink bled a little through the paper, but she didn't mind. It made the truth visible on both sides. Evening light crept through the window when her phone buzzed. A new message. From Noah. "All filings complete. All accounts final. You taught them a lesson I never could. NR." Marla smiled, setting the phone down beside her ledger. For once, no reply was necessary. A few minutes later, Irene arrived unannounced, as always, carrying a bottle of wine and two mismatched glasses. "Figured we should celebrate the end of a very expensive education," she said, grinning. Marla laughed softly. "Whose?" "Theirs," Irene said, pouring. "Tuition paid in humiliation and legal fees." They raised their glasses, the wine catching the last of the day's light. "To quiet vengeance," Irene said. Marla nodded. "To clean books." They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and satisfying. Later, after Irene left, the house grew still again. Marla stepped outside, barefoot in the cool grass. The garden smelled of soil and thaw and something sweet she couldn't name. The mountains glowed pale in the distance, their edges soft against the dusk. She stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet, feeling the steady pulse of her own peace. Somewhere down the hill, a car engine turned over. Maybe Drew's again, maybe not. It didn't matter. Marla turned her face toward the fading light and whispered to the open air, not in bitterness, but in completion. "My son said, 'We're done feeding you.' So I fed the bank with his account." The wind carried the words through the pines, scattering them like seeds into the soil she'd finally made her own. and as the first stars appeared above the ridge, the cottage behind her glowed soft and solitary. A ledger closed, a balance kept, a life quietly, perfectly reconciled.